Okay,
There we go. Let's do that.
great. Thank you, Vlad. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So, this is our second session of the Marketing Cloud Foundation series, and we'll be covering email and web channel content today. So, for those of you who missed the first session, don't worry. I'll be sharing the link to the recording in the chat. So, do bookmark it. It's the playlist in YouTube, and we will add all the subsequent recordings there. Okay. And as you go through today's session, do type in your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get them answered as we go along. All right. So with that, let me pass it back to Vlad to take us through today's session. Over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Shabu. So you should see the slide, right? I hope that it's coming through. Just double checking that it's a good correct share. Yep. Okay. Good. So welcome everyone. Once again, we are in this Marketing Cloud bootcamp for practical sort of experience, I guess. And as a part of our session today, we're going to be looking into the content. Content is important component. We often sort of look into doing a lot of technical stuff, but when you practically put into performing certain tasks, I personally find it quite often challenging because content itself should not be an isolated sort of experience. You need to think about the data. You need to understand what the requirements are for personalization, for dynamic content, and how to integrate and work with them. That's only one side of the story, though. There is another side of the story which comes down to practical use of the content and how do you construct and build it up for the end user in mind. And if you are yourself is the end user, then how do you get used to all of these different things that we have in the platform, all these features and functionalities? So that's something that we're going to try to uncover today. We're going to briefly talk about the content itself on the email channel. So we'll look into and briefly being introduction, I mean. So content on the email studio, templates, content block types. We're going to look into creating landing pages for different experiences in the web channel. And then we will also discuss the configuration of the send, because the content on its own is not applicable. Like it's not just sitting down there. If you are configuring and working with the content, most of the time you need to build an email, you need to start executing sends, test it out, validate it, and so forth. So we'll look into a couple of other components that get into the mix. And then we will look into potentially trigger send configuration, because it's a bit of an interesting thing where the data and the content come together. So that's extending our conversation from the previous time about what particular elements we need to do when it comes down to data configuration. I will share with you one piece of the theory today, and it's really talking about data extension templates. It's a bit of a forward word for what we're going to be doing. Last time we went through building up the data extensions. I demonstrated you how you create them in the platform. And when I was going through them, if you remember, if you've been with us or watched the recording or will be watching the recording, you will see that when we were creating these data extensions, I choose the option to use standard normal data extension. There are a few templates in the platform. They may or may not be configured immediately on new accounts. So if you find something is missing in your particular account, you can always request the support team to provision it for you. So the templates are essentially just that, template. And in the normal sense, what the template is, it has a predefined structure. So certain fields are included, maybe sendable properties configured, so that when you're configuring one of the data extensions using one of these templates, it will inherit certain attributes that you won't be able to modify. They are restrictive. So for example, in our case, when we need to configure a triggered send data extension, then some of the fields, up to I think 6 or 7 fields, will be created for us. And they're already created for certain functionality. So when we start looking into how do we personalize the message, how do we include content that is provided from the data into email, then most of these fields might come into play. There are a few other templates. I'm not focusing on them too much, just from the experience perspective that from the send configuration, most of the time you can come across configuring the triggered send data extension. And if you do in fact need to do that, as you will see as we go along today, you need to create it using that particular template. It's just how mechanics of the triggered send work. We'll touch on that as we go, but this is as much theory as I wanted to share. If you are put into perspective of, remember this is a practical course, if you're a developer or administrator that needs to kind of look into that, I don't think it's most of the administrative tasks would be sitting in that space when it comes down to content. Majority of the time, these are developers, campaign specialists. You could be an email specialist, you could be a content specialist, doesn't matter what the role is. More for the fact that you are responsible for the content configuration, maintenance, and potentially execution of the send. So as you would expect then, what your knowledge should be or experience should be is how do you create the template in Marketing Cloud and really understand the differences between the templates and the actual email, because sometimes it could be misinterpreted if you come from other different email sending platforms. How do you create different content assets, uploading the files, maybe uploading images and so forth. How do you configure dynamic content? Because that is important for us. We strive to be, personalized. We strive to be relevant communication channel, and therefore, when we configure all of these different messages, they have to be, some sort of dynamically driven based on the data that we have about people. We'll look into some of the steps to test and validate your messages, and then, as I said before, configure the triggered send. We will look into that configuration of the send details, things like sender profile, delivery profile, and so forth. And then at the end of that, we'll look into creating landing pages for different purposes altogether. As a practical side of things, so that's where the slide kind of ends. We're going to look into building up an email template. We're going to create maybe a couple of emails. I'll put several here in my sort of interest that I want to cover and touch up, at least two. We'll look into configuring sender delivery profiles and send classifications, because that will give us the send details and hopefully understand from your perspective when and how these come together. And then we'll create a few landing pages that we're going to sort of put a bit of a mechanics into in the subsequent follow-up series, because that's where things get a bit more interesting and a bit more tricky. So let's do that. Let me skip out of that presentation slide. I'm going to switch to share. Before I deep dive into that, I want to as well share with you that we did speak about that for giving you a bit of a practical preview of the guides. We're going to be sort of one week backwards, if you will. I did share last time and briefly presented to you the actual, what are we going to be going through. So this time around, I've got that link ready. It's shared, it's externally shared, so you should be able to just type it in the browser and access that. And let me just paste it into the chat so everyone here can look into that. The content that we're going through today, though, so just keep in mind that it is not included here. I'm going to include it for the next session, so make it available in time. What the aim and objective that we want to go for, so if you want to look into that, there is a scenario itself that talks about a few different experiences that we want to build, like journeys and so forth. And then we want to look into some of the configuration assets that we're going to go through. So the outline gives you an idea of what we're trying to achieve as a bigger picture, so you would understand the context of why am I creating all of these different things, why do I need to go up and build up all of these different emails and whatnot. And then when it comes down to the solution components, you will see that what we're constructing sort of sits somewhere within that space. So last time we looked into how did we configure the data extensions that we've got, a few of them listed down here. How do we get the file imported and so forth. I didn't cover things like compression and encryption for the file feeds. I might actually record a separate session for touching based on that, because they are integral parts, and then potentially some of the automations. But outside of that, we've got a few emails that sort of need to lead us into certain areas. So ultimately, the objective would be to configure a couple of journeys. One of them would be welcome journey that we send out to customers who sign up with a brand, and part of that email we want people to go up and update their personal profile. Today we've got amazing features in the platform, things like interactive email. That's something I'll try to touch on today, but more practically, because not every email client would support that, we kind of need to have a bit of a fallback. So if we want to collect the data in real time from the email, that's one story. If it doesn't work, we want to take customers to maybe a landing page where they fill out these details. submitted, we want to put the details into the data extension, and as you can see here, we want to initiate the triggered send. So that will send a follow-up communication saying, well, thank you for updating your profile details and so forth. So a few flows that we want to construct here. And then the second part of the experience is kind of talking about that feedback survey that we want to communicate to the customer. The details within these emails would contain some of the dynamic components that we want to construct. So we'll look into saying, well, practical view of that. If you are the person who is working with the content, so there is about what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 communications that need to be sent out, and you are requested, or your job is to configure the actual email template and then build out all of these emails all together. When it comes down to web, you are expected to build these web pages. So you've got the form where the individual can provide the details and submit them. And then once submitted, you need to do some sort of processing. The processing component will come up next time. It's a bit more technical, so we'll look into working with that potentially next time. And then depending on the time how it goes together, we'll try to feed that configuration of the triggered send. Because again, if you're the person who's responsible for constructing that, I'll explain why is it important to configure it, and how does that content with data comes together when it comes down to the triggered send context. So that's the plan for today. There's quite a lot of things, quite ambitious. Shibu, please keep an eye on the questions in the channel. If there's anything I need to address as we go, don't hesitate to jump along, interrupt me at any time, and we'll talk about that. Data-wise, from the previous session, there is a set of data extension that we need to configure. I've got them all listed here with the way for you to configure the sample data, but if you're looking into where did I get these different tables and whatnot, they are all listed here. So you should be able to at least have a look and see how they go. From our side, we'd be looking into getting some of these data files coming up through the file import. We might look into doing an API call. I think it's session number 4 for us. So we'll see how many of these different things will come together at a certain point in time. But that sort of gives you an idea of where we are in terms of getting the requirements and what we're trying to achieve at the bigger holistic picture. All right, data-wise, just wanted to demonstrate it. I didn't populate anything just yet, but I did create all of these other data extensions that were needed. Remember last time I went through a bill from the customer, I did populate it with some of the information. So I've got at least a number of records I can work with. You can see there's plenty of details for me to start sort of playing and working with when it comes down to crafting emails. I did create a couple of folders. So on the left hand side, just kind of touching base on what we've done last time, is managing the data and managing the structure of the account. So, organizing them into certain folders. You would see that as an example here. Now, when we start working with the content, there are 2 places for us to work with that. Number one is we're going to jump into the content builder. So you would see it sits under the content builder environment, and you're starting with the content builder menu option. The content builder itself, think of that as our sort of asset management repository. It's a place where we store all the creative assets, and it kind of provides the ability to work with that almost like that CMS style experience. So interesting things that you need to be aware of, and what you need to sort of straight away pay attention to will be things here on the left hand side. So you've got local and shared views, as long as the sharing is configured in the account. And basically, when it comes down to operations and when it comes down to creation, you kind of keep in mind that some things you might be doing in the local business unit and one of the business units, but if you later down the track need to share all of these assets, like in my account, for example, I've got plenty of items shared over here, so I can actually put them into folders and I can share out a lot of stuff. So you can see there's plenty of creative assets that sit in my account in the shared folders. Normally when I start, there's an empty view, there's nothing here, and the local folders here, they're just all empty. I need to create the folder very similar to data extensions. Again, keep in mind that naming convention is quite important. As you can imagine, there's plenty of things that you're going to be creating, and sort of thinking about the hierarchy is good and important. If you've got a lot of content that is sort of a one-off in and out, and maybe campaign specific, seasonal promotions, Again, still create a folder for that. Maybe it could be a year and a month. So you kind of go and say, well, today is 2021, it's March, so you go -03, and that's a very simple way of at least providing some hierarchy. So, you know, at the very least, you know when was the last time or when was the content created in the first place. So when you further down the track need to do cleanup, you can. And then creating the actual items. So, you know, when I start here, there are a few controls here. I'm not necessarily going to gear towards them. Looking into what you can see in the view. So when you start seeing the assets, you can kind of figure out what you're doing. And then filtering some of the results. So you can choose and say, well, I'm actually only interested in certain items, whether it's tagged or not, different content types. So you've got quite a few things to kind of navigate. Don't be afraid to customize it for yourself. It's your view, it's not the entire account view. It's really user preferences rather than anything else. And then when you start working with the assets, you can look into a couple of streams here. Number one, if you're talking about things like images, if you're talking about things like maybe some CSS files and whatnot, some assets, maybe even HTML files, you can upload things you know, through these dialogues. So you can add items into here, or you can go through the create wizard. So whatever way work, you can see that the upload is here still, and there are quite a few different options to go through. Creation wise, you will see what is important for you to understand. There are different options for email message, for email template, and for content block. So as we're talking about email, I'm not going to go into other items, but they're going to be relevant for mobile applications if you use with push and SMS messages. So the structure between these three and the relationship between these three is in a way twofold. So number one is template. The email template, let's make it clear. It's a skeleton, it's a blueprint, it's a placeholder sort of content that you're putting together for you know, identifying the brand, identifying some of the you know, standard features that come with every single email that you don't have to repeat or spend time to creating these elements over and over again. So you define that look and feel that is applicable to all communications, and then off you go. There could be things like you know, seasonal template changes. So one of the customers that I worked with in the past, they had like a summer campaigns or summer look and feel and winter look and feel. Some of them were darker shades, the other were lighter shades. Again, this is really based on their brand and guidelines. Now, the content block are elements that you can include into email templates. So if you're creating, for example, a piece of HTML, if you want to create an image or like upload image block that have a particular styling and so forth, you can create these elements and you can have them available within the account. Later down the track, when you start creating the actual email message, what you do is you choose the email template, and then you start populating that email template as effectively think of it as like a bit of a Lego pieces. You start building up the email using these content blocks, bringing them all together. And that's exactly what we're going to go through and build up today. So let me open up my notes and a cheat sheet, because there are a few things that I don't necessarily want to go up and build from scratch. We start with email template because that's sort of, as I said, it's a foundation for us. There are two options here. I can go from existing template, and great element of Marketing Cloud. So depending on your experience, skills, if you're told that you've got HTML, if you need to develop and design, there are plenty of things that we provide out of the box within the platform. So if I go into the basic tab over here, you can see that I've got varieties of different templates that I can choose through. You can see that there is not much of a styling, but there's a really nice layout sort of design on a lot of these, right? So different sort of type of layouts within the content itself. But in my particular interest would be is like, how do I actually create a particular template? So if I take, let's say something that is a bit more complex, but can be maybe usable 2-to-1 column. So if I choose that to be a template for myself, what I'm kind of expected to know, it very much feels like creating an email, right? And that's absolutely correct. It looks like that. It sort of provides us ability to work with in that same format, and experience is exactly the same. So you can see that I'm in the sort of click view of that email, so I'm not coding just yet. I'm working with particular different blocks. Now for me, what is interesting is I can start adding additional components into the template. And again, remember, this is a template. So what we're creating is a placeholder for the actual email once we start building it up. I can bring up different elements, like maybe I can bring up the button, I can bring up a text, I can look into a bit more advanced content. So if you want to be doing A/B testing, if you want to be using dynamic content, so switching depending on the custom attributes and so forth. Or remember, like I spoke about that earlier, interactive content where I want to have a form within the email. So depending on these different types, I can add them all in. I can work with a template, I can duplicate the component. I know that, for example, I need to have, the standard, and the way to think about that is you kind of need to know what email are you trying to build. So on the very top, I would assume that you would have a customer logo. So you'll upload the image here and you fill it all out. On the right hand side, you would look into saying, well, all right, so this layout provides me ability to build the content that's going to contain of the image block. It's going to contain some text. It's going to contain some call to action button. And I can choose to keep it. I can choose to skip it. It's up to me. Same for the other blocks. Maybe in this case, I want to come down here and say, well, actually, I don't need the button here. I just need a text, and I need to remove that. So in this case, when I'm done editing this particular piece, I end up with a template where there is that initial sort of hero. It's not an image. It's sort of a bit of a call to action, a bit of a message, a bit of a image, and then you've got text, and then text, and another button. Down at the bottom, you've got social follows. The great element why you want to have them, you've got different ability to work with these items in the click sort of manner. As you can see, I can fill out I don't know, maybe let's just keep these as the links, and for simplicity I'll just test them all out. Fill them in. You can see that there's a test link, so I can click on that and navigate through that. I can switch the alignment to be left side, right side, and so forth. So it's really up to me as a designer to figure out what I want to do. I can choose the color scheme. It was grayed out at the start, sort of following the flow, but if I feel a bit more creative this way, or even more creative, I might just go and choose these colors. So that could be something that I need. If I don't need a social link, maybe we don't have an Instagram, I'll just zip it all up. So it's a very nice, as you can see, sort of visual experience. I don't have to code it, and I can still create it. Now the great thing about all of that stuff that we do here is I will end up eventually saving it, as I said, as a template, and then provide a couple of placeholders for the email creator to work with. Now, how do I want to preserve some of these elements? Would be through some of these controls. So I can actually look at the properties of that block, and I can look into locking this particular element, meaning that as an email created later down the track, I won't be able to come and modify that. It's going to sit with a lock property. So it's a good way to sort of structure your template in the same way as if you'd be building an email, but at the same time, you ensuring that some of these elements become non-editable, and therefore restricting your customers from making a mistake. It is very important to observe that we're working with a template. Again, this is super critical. If you need to look at the code, the system generates all of that great responsive stuff for you, and you will see that if I want to see show full HTML, it will display things that are hidden from me, some of the extra styling or components that are not modifiable, and then system generated code. So that gives you like the whole layout of what we've actually done, and what is being produced by the platform behind the scenes. You've got controls to allow you to switch to the mobile view and to the desktop view. There's not much of a choices in terms of different screen size and resolutions, but at least it kind of gems it out and gives you ability of preview how it's going to look like. Because maybe that layout with the image and button text, if I looked at that at the start, it was great, but right now I'm kind of going, well, actually I'm a bit concerned because it's not exactly what I want. So maybe I want to switch and change these layouts altogether. Maybe I want to have an image coming up beforehand, or replacing it altogether, and dragging the text with the action block on the right hand side. So I can play around and say, like, visually it works okay, but when I start working with a mobile, that doesn't give me the response that I want. I'm not going to save this one, and because what I want to show you is demonstrate how to create another email template using paste HTML. Quite often in the configuration, when you kind of work with the customers, you end up having the you know, the code provided to you. So creative agency would create a template. They're going to give you the whole bulk of HTML, and let me just copy it all out and stick it into the editor. So copy in and paste it all in here. Similar to the you know, the visual editor, you can see that I've got different blocks here. They are interactive, so I can still work with them. That didn't quite work, so let me look into doing that in a different way. I know sometimes it does that copying for me incorrectly, so give me a sec. I've got some extra characters here, which I wanna copy out. So give me 1 second. Let's see if that works a bit better. Still not. It's all to do with encoding. So one of the things I want to say is I want to teach you how to do the HTML. So if you are in the team where or if you are in the role where you expected to produce these, you kind of need to know HTML coding. You need to understand how the code works across different email clients, and you know, the things that we've got in the email, things like styling, the media responsiveness, and so forth, because I still want to be able to look at that in the mobile view as well as the desktop view, right? So these are the elements that we would expect you to know and figure out how to work with. Now, a few things that I wanted to share here. Again, this was my copy paste HTML. So I pasted HTML that was designed by someone, and in the code view, one of the other things to kind of look into is just how I define these different elements. So I've got custom block here, which is my heading. I've got another custom block somewhere else. So these areas are effectively the placeholders for my content, and these are the ones that you kind of need to be aware of when you're taking a design picture. So you can see that this particular one is data type slot. It's got the key mscript, and then there is a data label that says this is mscript. It's an initialization block. Practically, if I need to add something else here, so maybe you can see that in this case I did actually list out the content, the note comment for you that I want to use layouts to structure your content here. So I can go up into the layouts and almost push them and pre-build them straight away. So I can drag and say, well, effectively, when you start building an email, then the expectation is you'll have multiple of these. If I need to bring up more, here's another two, and so forth. So I can start tinkering with them as I need to. I don't have to do it in the template, and that's kind of like a bit of a beauty of that. So you can be as complex as you need to, or as simple as you need to. From my perspective, the key point that I wanted to have is I just want to keep it the same way as we sort of started. I want that to be the starting point. Now, great thing you can see here is when I actually use that, because I used copy paste HTML, right? I didn't have an option for these elements, right? Or social components, for example. Maybe you want to code them once. In the previous case, we locked it out, right? So maybe if I want to look into, you know what, maybe I want to do a social follow, a social share here, bring it down here, maybe one of these areas. Should have done it a bit differently. So hold on, let me just do it, delete. Yes. Maybe I want to add like an additional block here and say, okay, let's drop the social buttons here, configure them, and then I can do a lockdown of that element. So maybe I want to have only single row, double row, whatever. So in this case, I'm kind of mixing bring the content from somewhere else and ability to kind of build it out and lock it out. So if I do that, then this becomes not modifiable when I structure the email. But I, as a template owner, I can unlock it and kind of work with it and tinker with that. So up to you how you do that. I'm just finding, like, as I said, I'll keep it to the level where this is an empty start point template. The point when it comes down to creating these, and one of the things that is super important for you to be as a person who builds it, think of the content that if I write like this, if I want to modify these, someone will have to go back into the code view, right, and actually change the content right within the code somewhere. So I'll have to go show full HTML, show me everything that is hidden. And as you can see, even change the text. I can't quite modify it here. I'll have to come into the HTML component. That's one of the risks, I guess, or at least considerations where, you know, yeah, if we're doing that, then we may or may not be able to customize that. But on the other side, it's a beauty, because what I've done is now I've built up the layout that is available to every person who's going to create emails. They can interact with these items, these placeholders, in a drag and drop fashion, bring up the content, but they don't have to or don't have to be afraid that they're going to break the email. Right, the structure itself is here. It's enforced on them. If they want to extend that and expand that, they can. But practically, there is a certain elements of brand that we want to enforce on every user. They are already done for them. So in this case, I'll do save. This system will ask me for the template. So let me just look into. We'll just do main branded with one column. I can choose similar to content builder where I want that to be, and then do you remember I spoke about sharing? I can choose whether I want to share or not. So it's a main template with one column layout for me. Saving that, and that's it. Notice that we're not doing any test previews and whatnot, because it's pure placeholders. There is no real action that we expect from the template. And if you modify even more, you can save and close it, and ultimately come down here. Right away, getting your attention to that type column, right? It tells you it's a template. So that's very important, because that's what we need to kind of pay attention and keep an eye on when we're creating the emails. Then quite often I've seen people who start at the first place, they still click on go create an email template, and they go and choose one of these options once again. And it's almost like a bit of a repetitive process, because the template is already there. Our next logical step is supposed to be either creating content blocks that we might be reusing, or creating the actual email message. So since we've got the content created here, I'll kind of go and show you a bit of a speedy time to kind of work with the template. So I'll start creating the email itself. So in our view, again, I can choose one of these existing templates. It's a very similar experience to how we created the template, but again, pay attention. We're creating an email, right? So not the template. We're creating the final result that we're going to be sending to the customers. I can look into empty flows. These are more sort of inherited, very simplified, plain, placeholders for you. You might have a bit of a layout structure, but these are the ones that not necessarily mobile responsive. And then the other element that I didn't necessarily show you, but these are the great sort of placeholders. If your customer doesn't have a creative services, they didn't necessarily think through paying for the template, you might craft something for them using one of these styled templates, and with some modifications, change the color scheme to be more brand suited and whatnot. It really depends. From my perspective, I'm going to go into my saved folder, saved templates tab, and I'll choose that main branded one with a single column. And click select. The next behavior that the platform will sort of go through is ask you to define what is the name of that email. So I'll start, this is our, which is going to be, let's do the feedback survey. And then description wise, this is our first communication for the feedback survey journey that we're going to craft later down the track. You can see that we've got different language encodings here. So if you work with different languages, might be worthwhile ensuring that you choose the right encoding here. Sharing, if I want to share this particular email, because I can build template and share it out, or I can build an email that people can use and so forth. So again, you might be doing some operations in one business unit for all the creative stuff, and then sharing template and email across the organization. That is absolutely possible. So I can click share and nominate which particular business units do I want to go up and share through. So I can tick the checkbox, and it will start populating what I want to do. Not gonna go through that right now. It's not necessarily super important from what we're doing. The next step for us is populate the actual content. So you normally start with the subject line. And the subject line is a simple text editor, but it does allow you for inclusion of different personalization components. So you can start doing even dynamic subject lines using that block. So you can type what is my standard subject line and create a couple of rules based on the different data elements. So you can choose maybe if my customer attribute, maybe it's a loyalty tier or how many points they've got acquired, we can have a completely different subject line. So I'm not going to go through that complexity just yet. All I'm going to do is I'm going to tell or copy it from my sheet. As I said, I've got a bit of a cheat sheet here. So click done. Very important to have done. And then pre-header, which is really the text that sits sort of just above the body and normally limited to something like about 80 characters. Again, if I want to do, do put some personalization to play, I can certainly do that. So I can do hi and then use that drop down to choose maybe first name. Tell us about your recent rental, right? So change it to be like that. That's done. So that's configured. That sits effectively ready and good to go. As you can see, system saves that all the time. There's a good side of that and there's a bad side of that, because there is not really playback into undo here. You kind of need to be mindful of as you go along and build up stuff. When you click these buttons to close the dialogues, there is no easy way to revert the changes. So be mindful when you're working on that. Now, let me tell you a few things about the template that I constructed here. There's one thing, it's kind of like my personal best practice that I came through through the period of time. Practically, most of the emails that I worked on contain, some element or some component of the M script. And the way the M script is done is it's sort of, you kind of hide it out. So M script is a server-side code that is executed before the email leaves platform. So practically leaving white space in place of any M script placeholders. There is nothing that we produce. It's not included in the message. It's very much like empty string. What I don't like is sometimes because of the way you format and code it, you end up with plenty of blank lines and so forth. So in personal preference for me, I kind of design that view of that block, that it contains a certain code and certain logic, and it's effectively provides me a placeholder for sticking the M script and then hiding it with HTML comments. So it doesn't matter if I create like a structure there, a few line breaks and whatnot, it's not bothering me, because simply it's just going to be hidden by the time when we actually hit the send button. And I was trying to show the code. Either way, so if I do have these blocks, if I do have these placeholders, I create them in a certain way, and I'll demonstrate you an example of that code. So you'll see, you don't have to adopt that practice, but it's something that is good for me to have. The other reason why I do it at the very top of the template is the processing of the email is sequential. So you start at the very top, and then you go from top to bottom. That's why I kind of like to do all the, let's call it like black box magic that is happening in the code that is not in the visual view, right? I might need to do a lookup of the data in different data extensions. I can do some calculations. Maybe I want to do some formatting with some components and so forth before they render in the email. Then in this case, all of that is nicely encapsulated in that one single block at the very, very top. How do you create stuff on that right hand side? So you start again, because these are now placeholders. At this point in time, there's absolutely nothing here except a few divs or tables and columns, and therefore I'm kind of like, I know that my platform understands that, but if I want to send that email, it will kind of come down to me without anything. So, and a good way of looking into that is if I switch into that preview and test, go and find my data extension, or even without finding it, you can see that pretty much everything collapses down, right? So there's no content, there's nothing here. It doesn't have any sort of valuable information. But when I come back here, I've got these placeholders. So let's look into kind of bringing up some more interesting play here. How do I construct that email? So I use now few options. I'll choose the free form block for MScript here at the very top. You can see the system opens up the dialog, and I've got the view to work with it as a, this is plain text, right? because I'm typing it, but at the same time I can look into the actual HTML editor and I can make it to be, let's put it H2 and make it a bit more fun. And all of a sudden it becomes a bit more than just a plain text. So I can work with that content block whichever way, but you know, I can do it in HTML. I can choose my formatting, and I said, well, let's you know, let's play with that, make it a bit of a bold one or something like that. So I can try to apply some more styling into that. So you can see that drop down kind of comes up, maybe because it's a heading, it doesn't really let me do that. Maybe I just want to change the color. So all you kind of do here is you work with you know, what you see is what you get, editor style. I can come here and code it in the full sense. So that's one of the very common blocks that you can work practically around styling. Again, you can see that how do we work with it. There's one great thing that I found is you can show and hide it on the mobile devices. That's one of the good convenient switches, because maybe some components that you have, they are designed for the desktop, they haven't been designed for mobile, and they don't need to be. So you can flip the switch and says if we're rendering under a certain mobile item, you can shorten it up. I see that there was a raise of hand. I just want to make sure. Am I coming through clear? Is the screen coming through okay?
Yeah, no issues, Vlad. Yeah.
Oh yeah, cool. Do we want to take a question? I just want to make sure that we're giving a chance to.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Maybe yeah, we can take that. So one is related to AmScript. Jagdish was asking a question. They have an issue where they're using AmScript in email. The business is facing trouble seeing thumbnails in Sales Cloud. He's asking if it's an expected behavior, or how can we see more clear thumbnails back in Sales Cloud?
Yeah, I mean, look, thumbnails is a bit of a challenge because when we render it, and that sort of comes down to that exact same example. So if I start coding that, right, if I'm going to look here and say, okay, I'll just use HTML editor as an example. So if I'm going to go and say, okay, set var equals empty, then maybe do 10 of these. And if the system is not really doing anything else here, it kind of builds that preview for me, right? And that's exactly what I was referring to when I looked at that in the visual editor. That's not really appealing. I can see the code. If I've got the placeholders for the rest of the emails, even down the bottom here, you can see that these are all the personalization attributes. It's not very readable, and I think some of the thumbnails, when we generate them, they could be as snapshots, and most likely they are the snapshots of the kind of like the email temp, like the final email, but not the one that was sent. More of that sort of the email that we build up. So it would include the code. It could contain all of these personalization variables. Now the trick sometimes is as simple as just that. What I've done here is I've commented out the AmScript block, and based on notation from the email sort of view, what the system would see in the final result is it will just see the comment beginning and the comment is ending. That's it. Everything in the middle just wipes away. So yes, you might have a couple of lines in here. Still, we're going to end up with just like a comment block. So that's one way of dealing that, and that's one of the ways that I specifically work with the content. I'm trying to make sure that AmScript is encapsulated in that. If you do have it within the actual email, when you've got like a button name that's coming up and generated, if you do have some personalization components, unfortunately, there's not always a way to work around that. So it's just how the system sort of works.
Yeah, there's one more question that Manoj had. I kind of answered it, but just wanted to get your thoughts on this. So when we compare with the CRM side of things, they have like email limits, right? And there's something called email relay services. So Manoj's question is like, anything that we have on the SFMC side, would it impact anything to do with the email relay services and how it's configured on the CRM side? Or it's totally separate, we have our own licenses based on what we purchase. That's how we have email send limits.
Yep, that's a very good question. And I'm glad you asked that. So for those of you who work in the CRM space, the email that go out from Marketing Cloud are completely separated from what you do in Sales and Service Cloud. So that CRM platform has its own sending engine at this point in time. Anything you do in Marketing Cloud is not bound to its limit. So we don't have a daily quota. We don't have any limits to send out. And that's one of the other reasons why quite often customers coming up to the marketing automation tool, because CRM is not marketing, right? It's a very different email activity and behavior. And to a certain degree, we even encourage some of the behaviors that you would normally do potentially with CRM templates to bring them into Marketing Cloud. You know, any experience and interaction with a customer could be a marketing experience. You can, you know, prettify any email. You can include even some of the stuff into service messages. So, you know, could be some promotions, or, hey, have you seen like some of the latest products that arrived in the last 3 days? Even though you had a case, but if you're sending that block on the case resolution message, then there is no reason why you can't promote some stuff while you do that. So it's an opportunity for marketing. So it's certainly different sort of technology, and therefore a completely different set of rules and applications and limitations. Good question. All right. Any other sort of relevant?
No, that's it, Vlad. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Cool. All right. So what I will do is I'll keep this very plain text for now. Actually, no. I'm gonna do it differently. I'm gonna clean this out because the mscript stuff is gonna come up, I think, differently in a different place. We'll look into that when we get to the different component. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paste the actual content. Now the content in the same way. So let me just find the actual piece of code. I can create a content block. Remember, I was talking about that before, and then drag that block into the email template, or I can create it right within the email template. So that's another element for me to find. There we go. How do we do that? In exactly the same way. So if I'm going to be creating the email using the content block, I can paste maybe HTML here, right? And paste up the code. So look at that this way. And that's probably something that Manoj was referring to, right? So I've got some personalization in play, and it looks like a bit, whoa, it's a bit too much here. But either way, what we're going to do is we're going to modify that potentially a bit. But more to that, I just pasted it in. Now, if I'm done editing, and that goes back into these good best practices on how do you actually work with that. If you can see that I want to edit that, it will always flick me into HTML. If you're working on that, that's probably fine. If you think about your customer, or if you're an end user and maybe thinking about someone else coming up and maintaining that, maybe what do you need to do if you need to change the format of the text, or if you need to add another sentence here, it's going to have to do with HTML. There's a really good phrase someone said. I mean, these days everyone should speak HTML. I love that statement, but sometimes practically it's not the best way to think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same delete that, the same trick as I showed you before, just use free form. And it doesn't take me more than one extra click to do exactly the same paste. But the beauty of that is I can actually now come back here and work with that content in a, you know, like in a more user-friendly manner. I put it this way. So maybe I want to say, let's prettify that to be my favorite green color, and boom, done. Right? I don't have to go and figure out like what CSS I need to do that, and especially if someone is maintaining that, you know, like is not very skilled, works with the theme, great. So that's where we're gonna leave that. Now, I wanted to use that content maybe multiple times. Maybe it sits in some different, you know, different areas and blocks. I can actually save the block from here. So that was another way to think through. I can go through the menu, create these different email type or content blocks, but I can save one of these blocks from here, and I'll say this is, you know, maybe the hero content for feedback survey, and save it again. Choose the folder, and where do I save it? Click save button, and done. So this component is now sitting, the copy of that sits in its own block as well as sits in the email, and I can still customize it to a degree that I need to. Maybe for some emails I want it to be green, for some emails, maybe in this particular case, what if I want to change the color to be not green? Maybe I just want that to be my second favorite color is orange. Let's do orange, and boom, I can keep the main message in the same format. We'll just keep that one as it is. So we done. Remember, the saving still works as we go. I don't have to go and look at that. Now, the interesting thing for me is just kind of figure out what is happening with these with this text that we have. And it's an AMP script, so I don't want to dive into that just yet today because we have a separate session for that. But practically, kind of to disassemble, since we started with that, if you look into that, there are a few components here. There is a lookup statement, and I jump into the middle because that's a function. So I'm going to look into what are we doing first. We're doing lookup. We're looking into the customer data extension. We're pulling out the first name. And the way we're finding the right first name is we referring to the customer ID using what we call a personalization string within the email set. So that underscore subscriber key would be something that normally comes up in the personalization string. If you're working with the emails, right, if you are one person who's creating templates and creating email blogs, it's super critical that you know what are these different personalization strings are. So let me see, personalization. It should come up in my view, personalization strings in Marketing Cloud. Let's do that search. It will give you the page and what you want to do. There are two ways. There's a developer side that talks about them, and there is that help.salesforce.com. You want to go into the help portal. You don't need to go through the developer in this case, but this is one of the places that you definitely want to bookmark if you work with content. This is super helpful. And you need to know at least 50% of these personalization strings in the email studio, right? You need to understand what they are. So system will tell you some of the default items that are coming through, and notice that notation is %%. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. What I'm more looking into is looking into what are these actual things that you get, and it's all available by default within the send context. So if I want to understand what I'm doing in the message context and what I'm kind of looking into, this one is something that I use for my trickery trick with mscript blog, something that we will definitely pay attention to. Now we're looking into, is it a test send? So do I need to do something conditionally? And for you honest, there is some information about the recipient. So it's the person that we're sending the message to. You can see that we've got the email address embedded into the email. These are the standard attributes, but the trick with them could be is if they were renamed in the profile attributes, then you won't necessarily get them. So with these particular ones, be a bit careful. So it always referred to something that is definitively sitting on the platform. The email address, standard string, is not going to change. You can't change that. Subscriber ID will give you the ID numeric value. But our interest is subscriber key, because remember when we design data extensions, we said for a customer data extension, what field identifies that individual for the platform, and we nominated that subscriber key relationship for them. So that underscore subscriber key is now, it's a reference back. I don't need to know what value was provided. I'll just use whatever value was provided to the send, and the system uses attributes from the data extension field for personalization, injects them into that send context. So in addition to all of these strings, with the exception of these first 4 or whatever they are, you're going to see that every field in a data extension that we're going to use as our audience will become available to us too. So anyway, we've got this subscriber key relationship, and it should kind of go into the lookup and bring us the details of that person. There are a few others, tells you like data extension names and whatnot, and then some other information in terms of reply names and so forth. When it comes down to subscription management, so if I'm going to switch back into the content itself for a second, you can see down the bottom, I've got this personalize your inbox, open in a browser, and then break up with us. It's my creative thinking as much as I can be creative. If I look into the code view, so let me just go back to the very bottom, you will see that, okay, this is the logo. I'm just trying to find where they are. Oh, there we go. So you can see that I'm using that profile center URL. Okay, so it tells me customize some things and so forth. There's another one that should say, okay, member address. Again, these are the ones that you should kind of know. Even though they're standard system generated snippets, but if you need to change and modify them, you can go up and look them up. So all of these items are here. Oh yeah, personalize your inbox. This is view email URL, right? Here, this is all the definition of what these things mean. subscription center, the profile center, the unsubscribe, and so forth. So I don't have any extra knowledge than anyone of you can have. That's why I said this is your pretty much bookmark page if you're working with the content. So you do want to know all of these items almost by heart. In some cases, when you're creating that content, you can choose the data to be populated, and I'll switch into HTML so I can easily demonstrate to you and without breaking things up. So I can include some of the formatting from the M script. I can include personalization elements. These are profile attributes that we have configured in the platform, and I can insert these code snippets. So I can go and say, well, I need a physical mailing address. So you can see that it builds me that pretty much that mini table that I have at the bottom of the page. If I need to say, well, I'm interested in the profile center or unsubscribe center, the system will give it to me. So you can see that visually it appears here, and this is how it looks like in HTML. And you can modify and tweak that. But you kind of need to know what these things are anyway. So if you are creating these templates, if you're creating the placeholders, you know what to do with them and how to work with them. Now, from our case, because our email is, we're going to assume that the first name is going to be provided. I'm going to just simplify all of that stuff. What I want to do is I'm going to get rid of that lookup. All right, so I want to keep first name. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to be that format. Actually, sorry, hold on. I'll just do first name. And we don't need these extra pages. So why do I keep this first name? If I looked into that extension shortly, you will see we do have a first name attribute, right? And one of the things that I want to do is, what I want to do is just, I want to use that proper case function, because sometimes could be all uppercase, sometimes could be all lowercase, sometimes could be a mixed bag as I refer to that. So people can type it, mistype it, and so forth. What we want to do is we want to, what we refer to normalize. We want to have uppercase first letter and then lowercase all the other letters in that view. So we're leaving everything else as is, and essentially we're saying, dear whoever the person is, thank you for your business, please take a moment to let us know about your experience, and you're going to take the survey. So that's very simple. We're going into, again, preview and test, and remember I was talking about we want to be able to work with content and figure out how do we test this out, how do we look into these things. You can see that at this point in time there's not much of the evaluation. The way preview and test works in this case is I need to go into the different data types, so I can choose list, groups, data extensions, and kind of figure out what I want to work with. So I'm going to go into my data extensions, inbound data, and remember I populated customer. You can see that the interesting thing is that the system doesn't bring me a lot of these options. So the reason for that, remember that sendable flag. So if you were not in the first part, when you create the data extension, that sendable or is sendable flag that we ticked on is the one that tells the system that this is the data extension that contains a list of customers or people that we can communicate with. And therefore, when I'm trying to make a choice, it limits my selection to only data sets that are sendable. That's why I don't see a lot of other data extensions, just see the first list. Now let's do a quick preview here. We'll choose select. And you will see that the system gives me an error. I'm going, oh my God, what's happening here? So this is very normal. And I did that purposely because I wanted to get you through that experience of understanding this is not the end of the world. That's normal. That's something that you can expect. Now, a few things to look into that. The system gives you these errors, and it almost like implies straight away there is some information that you should extract from that to understand what's happening here. So you can see that in my case, the error occurred when I was attempting to resolve the function call. So function was proper case, first name, and then it tells me where in the characters it was and so forth. So in the preview, you can see that subscriber message context was preview. Invalid characters appear at the end of the parameter value. I'm going, okay, first invalid character is N, right? So that's kind of bizarre. Now, the other trick I wanted to look into that. Do you remember this subject line when I personalized subject line? Yeah, look at that notation, and that's something, if you remember, that was sitting in the personalization string here, right? So all of these are %, the value. When we talking about personalization, it's different from MScript, and we're going to go through that when we get to the actual MScript day, but because we still already start sort of hacking through some of these things, this notation of %, and then whatever the value is, and then %, is telling the platform to look for the attributes that are part of the audience. So that's why at the very start of that call I said it is important when you work on the content to understand what data do you use to personalize your content. Without understanding what data, you won't be able to build successful sort of content, because you might be expecting that some attributes will inform the platform to switch the content from female centric to male centric to non-gender specific centric. We can't quite do that if you don't understand the data that is available to you. So my view here is limited to these 8 attributes on the left hand side. So that's where the first name will match to that first name. If I want to use first name, last name, I can use last name as well. It is provided in this audience. But in this case, when we're coming down to the specific notation, the % equal and then equal % implies inline M script. So it's a slightly different notation for the M script, which means that I need to change how I reference that attribute. Again, without going through too much details today, because that field has a space, the system treats that as 2 separate words, and it needs to have like a unique unique name without spaces. So space kind of like not allowed. If I do need a space, I need to wrap it into square brackets. So now if I click done editing and navigate back into the send preview, it should work and the system will populate that with that. And you can see that here for the subject line, the population happened as well. And for my content within the email itself, the population happened too. All right, that kind of gives me like at least the initial preview. So what we've done is we constructed the email template. We've created the email using the template. Within that email, we build up a content block, at least one, which is kind of good enough for us for now. And it provides us an opportunity now to preview. So when you're working with, you're building this stuff you don't want to look into, you go up and preview, you come to that preview and test, you choose the audience or an example audience, and effectively it populates the details. You can see that Vlad is coming from here, builds it all out for me. We managed to save the content block for potential reuse later down the track, right within the email when we're building that. So it's another great thing, an opportunity to look for. But one extra thing that sort of popped out right now is if you look at that email, right, there's an odd thing that comes up at the top. It says web version. And then there's that weird stuff coming up at the bottom that has like privacy policy, all that stuff. That's again, this is normal and common. And it takes us to the next step of the lab, is essentially to go on up and have a look. How do we configure what we refer to as the sender details or send details? So from my point of view, if I look at the email, this is pretty much good to go. I can look into clicking up some of the buttons potentially. They will take me or not take me. If they're system generated ones, they might not necessarily bring me to a particular place. If they are not system generated, if you link into to somewhere else, like to take the survey, then it should take me somewhere in the point. You can see that the link I've got, it's sitting here. This is the link that this action was pulled up into, and at this point in time, it's just something that sits in the progress. All right, so I kind of build a placeholder, but there's absolutely nothing else happening on that side at this point in time. The one thing I want to look into is just because we've got this web version replaced or represented with open in the browser. Breakup with us is unsubscribe, and as you can see, customize these customizations for subscription management. I need to get rid of all of that because it's a repeat. How do I do that? Again, going back to as I started, send configuration. So the email part hopefully is more or less clear at this stage. I'm gonna jump into one of the areas in the setup where we need to do, but before I did that, I just wanted to come back here to show you. So you can see template, right? That was the very first thing that we created, was a template. You can see that free form is actually a type. And if I'm gonna go and create the content blocks, you can see that free form is one of the content block types. So it's kind of like give you an analogy to, this is not the email, this is not the template, this is a piece of content that I potentially want to go and structure somewhere. This is my email. This is my final email because it says it's a template-based email. So it's using a template, and it is something that I can actually choose to send the message to. Quite often could be confusing, could be naming, could be confusing, the type might not be overlooked, but it is important to remember when you get down to send, when you start choosing an email within the journey and so forth, you would be looking for emails, not the templates. That's one of the big distinctions to have in mind. The template is rarely a final version of the email. You want to get to the point is where the template represents a combination of most common elements across all the emails that we're sending, so that the user who's creating the email doesn't have to rebuild all of these components over and over again. You just want to have a placeholders for content and take care of all the branding, of all the reusable elements, make sure that they're all standardized, approved by legal, approved by marketing, and ready and good to go. That's the point of the template. The email itself is the final thing that we're going to deploy. Think of that as something that we wrapped into the envelope and give it away. So that's our final thing. I'm going to create a folders just to kind of demonstrate templates, because that's another visual element for me to go and say, yeah, I want to do that. And I can choose and say move and stick it into the templates folder. So off it goes. It's going to sit there. With the creative, I can start creating other folders. I can create like maybe journey messages. I can create reusable content folders and start shifting things around. Don't get confused, because that's the reason I wanted to demonstrate specifically that. It does get a bit misleading sometimes when you click on the practical experience course. This is the name of the business unit, so it tells you that you are now at the business unit level, and what you will see is, unlike other user interfaces within Marketing Cloud, the content element is presenting you a view of all assets here. So if I go, like as an example, shared, it says all shared content, right? There's 63 items. They all are sitting down here. Same with local, it's at the business unit level. It tells me there are 3 items. So this is going across all folders, across all items. You can start seeing that it actually tells me this is a different location, right? The content builder sits at the top of the local folders, and this one is within a subfolder. So don't get confused, don't be scared. This is all normal, because once you start going into the actual content builder folder, then you see something that sits at the root. Then you go into the templates, filters it down to your specific item, okay? This is normal, and I want you to feel comfortable with that. I'm going to do a quick pause. Shibu, any other questions that worth addressing now?
No, not at the moment, Vlad. I'm actually answering quite a few of them, so we're good for now. Go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. And thanks for covering them. Our interesting space where we need to go is in this setup, and we're going to look into these 3 components of send that are sender profile, delivery profile, and send classification. When you start configuring the account, there's a standard setting for all of these sending items. So if I look into feature settings, Email Studio, if you look into these items, there are sender profiles, delivery profiles, and send classifications. Each of them have a standard item generated for you. Normal behavior, please do not delete them and do not modify them. You don't need to. It kind of breaks things up sometimes. You just want to keep them as is, right? But what you want to do is you want to create your own configuration. Before anything else, there is an item that's called From Address Management. For the accounts that have a sender authentication package, or oftenly referred to as SAP, don't mix it up with SAP software, right? That's a very different thing. Sender authentication package. It's all about ensuring that we validate or verify that the emails are being sent using kind of like they are allowed to be sent from that particular domain over a particular IP address. If you don't know, if you come from the background and you're not familiar with the mechanics of the email send, every email that we're deploying goes up through an IP address. So we're sending through a particular IP. The way we're sending it out is we're using a from address name. In my case, we can register a domain. It's cost money, and we can provide the registration for the customers. If they don't have a domain, they can delegate domain to us, and normally it would appear that it's already authenticated and approved, and you don't have to do much of that. But in some cases, you might be using an additional domain. If you need to do any verifications, that would be the place where you can configure and add pre-approved the email address. So I might say, well, if I want to use because my account does not have any authentication, you would see that it is pending status. And if I'm going to go back up into my email client, if I'm going to get the email, if I'm going to look into say, oh, hold on a second, this is indeed my email address and I'm allowing the emails to go and proceed, then this will become approved. I'm gonna save that just for a second. I need to do the approval because otherwise I'm not gonna be able to configure a couple of other elements. So give me a second to hopefully get that email, because that was another element. Because my domain is not approved, these confirmations might be delayed from time to time. So let's see if this coming up, similar to like last time with email notifications for the platform. So let me see in platform. I paused the screen share, so give me 1 minute and see if I can actually get here. It didn't arrive just yet. Okay. All right, we'll see how that sort of plays out. So maybe I'll do it a bit differently. Either way, it sits here at that specific email address that I need to be using for send. That's if I'm going to be using that. Now, sender profile is the first thing that we begin with, and without giving you too much theory, it's literally the place where we say what from name and from address do we use. So when we start send an email, if you think about your inbox, you've got the name, and then in the brackets you've got the email address that we're sending out from. So I've got, you know, RAV group that I created before. Again, default is the standard system one, but what I'm here is defining, as I said, okay, these are the details that I want to use. So I've got the name, system generated external key because I didn't provide it, and then description. So in my case, because we're using customer, you know, RAV group, I just use from RAV group and specify a particular email address. I can choose to use the user from the list, so it's another thing. If I have that option nominated, I can go up and choose you know, that, but I blocked it and I don't want to use it. So for me, just literally typing it in. The key important bit here is that, right? So in your accounts, when you're working with the customers, or if you're the customer, you need to ensure that you're using, and this message will tell you that you need to use that authenticated domain name. Otherwise, the system is going to get into trouble. Number one, they will tell you you need to verify that before you can configure it, or use that send configuration anywhere else in the account, for example, journeys and whatnot. And the second bit is I'll click verify here, just to see if I can actually trigger to receive that email communication to me. If not, I'll switch it to Gmail account. But yeah, so this is configured, this is sort of kind of good to go. And basically what it means is when we start setting up the email send, I can choose that configuration. It is good to talk from the customer side. What do we want to use as something that associates these emails to the brand? If you're sending it for the customers, if you're the customer yourself, think about your end recipients. What do they see in the inbox? That sort of represents you as a brand. And then the email here could be news, could be updates, could be, you know, catch all, whatever. It is just literally whatever the email you use. The good practice advice is be consistent. Make sure if it's a marketing, it should be like marketing at your domain and so forth. So something that sort of makes sense, and you want to maintain kind of like relationship between the end recipient and your brand. Delivery profile we rarely use at the start, but if you ever need to check, there's one thing that is worth looking into, is even in the default one. So when you kind of think about that, remember I was talking about the IP address that we use for send. So that could be one of the things to change. If the customer has more than one IP address, you can actually nominate which is the standard one to be used and so forth. But the other thing that I wanted to ensure is I demonstrate is that account default and account default for both header and footer. So in the email preview, remember this thing that was saying view it as a web page, and then at the bottom this extra piece. This is what's being added effectively to the email send, and it's done at the delivery profile level. So if I want to switch them to be none by default, then I'm assuming that the email template will take care of that. Let's not be risky, because there might be cases which is not the case and these items have not been added. That's why I said normally I would just create a new one, and I would say no headers or no header or footer. That's good. Use with templates that include header and footer. There are cases where you might need to have multiple options. There are cases where you can create the content and you can nominate and say, you know what, there is a specific content block for the header that I want to use, and you can just go up and nominate and find it and use it. But practically, like in practical cases, configure one that doesn't have header and footer, use it with your templates, standard, that's great, that's all you need to do. And then wrapping both up, you're going up into the send classification and create the configuration that includes both the sender profile and delivery profile. There are two different types configured by default. Again, as I said, these are default behaviors. One of them for commercial sends, one of them for transactionals. We want to create a commercial, so we're going to create like a marketing profile. So we're going to say marketing for from RAV group, and say use these with branded template for marketing comms. Right. Again, always use the description just to give a bit of a like hints on when and how to use these items. The classification here is really telling us what type of sends you expect to use it with, and it is important to differentiate them and understand what they do. In simple terms, if the customer is unsubscribed from marketing communications, using transactional send can override that preference. We want to respect that because we know we're going to be sending commercial stuff, so we're going to keep that commercial sender preference. And as you can see here, we can choose sender profile and delivery profile. So I'll choose delivery profile, no header or footer, because remember I clicked that verified button and I still did not receive that verification email from the platform. So we'll see how we play with that. You can always, even when you choose that send classification, you can always overwrite it when you're setting up the send. But the great thing is, once we've set up that send classification, now every time I configure the email send, I don't have to go up and play around with, choosing up these different from options. What delivery profile do I use? It's kind of like an easy way for me to work with. And I think I put myself into a bit of a trouble because I need to choose at least something verified, and it's not letting me. So. Let me try and get back to that a bit later, or try another trick. Let me just kind of do that. So stay with me for a quick second. Let me see if I can use my different account. Just switch it into Gmail and see if I can save that. Okay. That will come to me. I'll click the verify once again. It's pending. So let's see if for Gmail it would work differently. I might be in luck, might be not. It does happen with a bit of a trouble. And if not,
Vlad, while we wait for the email,
Yep.
I have a question from Manoj related to this. So, what approach do we take, like when the domain changes, like after a year, and we set it up for a particular domain? So let's say you have acquisitions or mergers happening, right, and suddenly you need to like change the domain.
Yep.
What's your advice or recommendations for that?
So very normal for that to happen. It usually needs to involve marketing team because it's very different from maybe transactional CRM changes of the domain. With marketing, it's not as straightforward. There is implied behavior that for a new domain, if you want to apply a new domain for your account, it will imply a whole new, what we call an IP warming exercise, meaning that you need to go through small sends to large sends. There's quite a lot of activities happening, and it's usually not an easy, fast switchover process. Once you get the new domain in the account, if it's coming up with authentication services, like if it's authenticated and everything, then it will be provisioned on the account and it should be verified. If you're adding new email domains for the send perspective, then you'll have to go through a similar verification process. But again, practically it's a longer process, much longer, and it needs to be thought through a bit differently. So I did receive the email here. I'll just click on verify in that link. And I'll show you when I go back into the sender profile, it should now tell me once I've done that it is verified. So let's see, going back into these RAV group, because we do want that to be verified. You can see it's not verified, so I can use that for sending. Okay, and then coming back to our domain, let me just quickly recreate this one. RAV, marketing. Oh, did I set? Perfect. So we'll use that. Sender profile is selected. I want to switch to no header or footer. Don't worry about send priority. This is normally not something that you need to take care of. Just leave it at normal. Click save. So now I've got these created sender profile or send classification, so I can use it for send setup and so forth. And that would be something that we gotta look into once we get to the triggered email. If we're not going to do it today, then we'll look into when we start configuring journeys. We'll certainly look into that. My next item on the list, let me just quickly double check where we are from that standpoint. So what did we want to do next? So we configured send, sender profile and so forth. We configured these details, and then we do collection of the landing pages. All right, I'll do the landing pages first. And then if I'm not going to get enough time to go through the triggered send and configuration of that, we'll do it next time. But at least, I mean, from the email template perspective, at least the send I should be able to cover. So for web stuff, we're going into the Web Studio Cloud pages, and there are two items here. So there's a new preview for the new experience, and there's a traditional one. I'll just go with the traditional for now. Mainly because we just want to follow a simple provided view. So we're going to create, remember for us, what we're interested in is we're going to create few landing pages for capturing the details, maybe profile update of the customer, and then pushing it through back into the Marketing Cloud. So I will look into creating what we refer to as a collection at the very first start. So when you get into the editor, and the reason why it's taken a bit of a time for the first load for me is there's at least one standard dot extension that if it's the first time that I'm going into that studio, into Cloud Pages Studio, it actually provisions it in the backend and it doesn't precede any field. That's for data collection altogether. So if I look into the overview, it gives me a list of like an empty space for collections, and I've got a bit of a summary. The way to think about that is we're going up into build up like a collection of pages. Think of that maybe like a microsite, right? So you've got multiple landing pages that you want to create. They are called a collection, and you group them logically. They don't necessarily have to be physically linked up to each other unless you're going up through a certain experience. So let's have a look. It can become a bit more practically visual. So I will create a collection. We'll call it profile preferences update. And in the description I can edit, but I'll just ignore it for now. It will create me almost like a folder. So at this point in time, the collection is just almost like a folder. I click open collection, and it comes down here. It's going to be a similar sort of interface in a way that it goes. So what do you want to do? It's empty. There's nothing here. And there are different options to go through. So when I click create, I've got landing page, I've got code resource, I've got microsite, I've got push and interactive email pages. So there's few things to go and build up, and the interactive email page could be something that I need to have as a backend for my emails if I'm collecting data, and it's not using the interactive email within the email itself. Like different email client will need some sort of supporting landing pages to work with them. But either way, different things you can see. Provision tells me that all of these are activated. For some customers, they might not be here, but if they've got Web Studio or Cloud Pages, they would have at least landing page and code resource and microsite. Microsite is more of creating like a example only. Creates the site like a true microsite. It has a bit of a navigation included into that. You can have a couple of pages, and it's a bit more of a visual editor here. So you can start, a different page. Let's go with home. I can create another page, which is going to be contact us maybe, and so forth. And you start sort of building it all up. They do come up, as you can see, there might be a link and reference between them and so forth. I can change the navigation style and how they look like. So it sort of builds up that really true microsite experience for you. There's a lot of visual here. It's a great tool if your customers are not technically heavy and they need to be able to update and maintain that. it's a fantastic experience to build it up. You can kind of figure out when you want to publish, how they work. You've got versioning in place, so you can create pages and launch them at certain times. Really a great opportunity to build that full-blown sort of web experience. And if I'm jumping on that link right now, I can't remember if it's publishing. No, yeah, it's not published, so it kind of gives me that view. So I need to do a bit of a publishing before I do that. But for our site, we're going to create a slightly different experience. We're going to create just a collection of these data pages, and I'll just remove that microsite. We're just going to create a landing page and go with it. The only other thing before I jump in, because I do have some of the resources hosted in a different business unit, but the code resource is something that I want to use if I work with things like CSS, JavaScript and so forth, and I want to host them here. I can certainly upload these as a code resources. The difference between having a landing page and the code resource is when we rendering landing page, we're consuming account utilization. So there's a notion of messages or super messages that we have for the account. Every time the customer renders the landing page, they are actually being charged for it as at least one super message. So it's important when you're doing development, when you're kind of building up these landing pages, ensure you understand that every time you're doing these tests and rendering that, it's actually consuming utilization. So be mindful of that. Code resource allows you to host these more static assets that you don't want to be charged for, because if you've got CSS, if you've got JavaScript, if you've got some icons, that's something that you can kind of think through. Anyway, in our case, we're creating a landing page. I'm just going to create that. What do we have that start here? All right. Now door activity preference. And I'm starting with a processing page. The reason I do that is because I've got two elements of the pages. There's number one, there's going to be form, where I'm going to host some questions for the customer to fill in. And then once they fill them out and click submit, the form needs to go somewhere. And that's what my processing page would be. So I'm going to create that using the content builder. Again, because if I want to do something a bit more like drag and drop and so forth, I can. I'll choose with a blank because it's a processing. I don't have to be super crafty here. But if I need to do, multiple sort of, again, header, footer, and so forth, I can easily do that. So you can see that's a blocks very similar to email, right? We're using content builder experience, and that's why I kind of pair up these two experiences together. It's in a similar format. It's in a similar session where you're kind of going up and saying, well, I can create the content block that I have on my account. I can even drag my, I don't know why is it duplicating here, but I can even drag my content from the email and use it right away here. So it's still going to work and kind of be applicable. So that's the benefit of kind of looking into defining your templates, defining your reusable components, because they can go into the email, they can go into the landing pages at the same time. I can choose layouts in the same way, and I can customize the design and look and feel of that page. What's the maximum page width, because it kind of narrows down the stretches of the internal block. Do you want to be relative, do you want to be absolute, and so forth. If you want to have a bit of a background, you can choose what color you want to use. Like a lot of these great sort of personalization elements and styling that's embedded into the form. If it's important for you to get into the fonts, you can change them. If you want to look into how this title would look like for heading 1, 2, and 3, and so forth. So there's plenty of items that you can customize even from design standpoint of view, and then sort of apply them for the landing page. In our case, very simple flow. I'm gonna stick to the HTML because this is processing bit, and I don't want people who can't code to be here. So if person is not available to code, like if they're not comfortable doing that, I don't need them to be here, and that's why I'm doing that purposely. It's just plain HTML, nothing else. We're gonna keep a very simple view of that. We're gonna have a thank you for updating your preference, and we stick in first name into that. A few things to note, and I'm just kind of opening up the editor a bit this way. So you can see that this link relevant. I've got the bootstrap included into that, so that's why I've got a bit of a styling applied. The thing that I wanted to pay attention to is this. So we've got first name, and because I was copy pasting it from the code editor, I know that this really means a bold. So I want to format that to be bold, maybe, as an option. Let's put it this way. And then the other side is first name. By now you know that personalization in our case doesn't work with, you know, curly brackets. We need to go into the something more like first name, right? But the other interesting element here would be is, unlike email address, email, when it comes down to landing page, you would know hopefully that it's stateless, meaning when you come to that page there is no notion of any attributes, there is no notion of any other details that might have come up from the email send and so forth. That's normal standard behavior. There is a slight difference. So if I'm going to go into that link once I publish that, there's nothing going to happen, and this %% is going to be empty. Even if I put it into these brackets, and if I use different notation, we don't provide anything. There is a way for us from the email to include some attributes from the email context and pass them into the landing page using mscript. And that's something that we will take a big advantage of to kind of push through. Now, the other element here is we're going to be calling out or rendering this page coming from the form page. So we're assuming in some way, shape, and form, we're going to pass up the first name here. So let me just leave out this as it is, right? I'm going to keep it the same way, because when we get to the some of the coding of the mscript, we're going to actually come back and modify that, so we've got a bit more details populated in the right way. Now, the other side is, depending on your favoriteness or not, there's a really good thing is you can format HTML if you're pasting it from somewhere and it's all over the place. It kind of does a bit of the formatting for you. Some things I really dislike, especially like that. I want them to be on one line, not on two. And here, the same, because it's a new attribute, it pushes it to the new line. I don't like that, so I kind of go up and tinker with that. Doesn't have to be. The other great thing about that is you can choose the theme. So if you prefer dark, if you prefer different colors, you can. The reason I'm showing that, because for people who do spend time in these tools, I know it's important. It is important for me at least. Similar view. You can preview in layout, you can preview in the final view. You can see that because we used specific content area, right? We choose the content builder landing page, kind of brings up a bit of a formatting, and that's when you go up into the design of the template and you said, well, I want the background to be that color, I want the heading to be styled certainly. That's why the system will generate a bit of a styling for you, and that's how it's been captured and put into the landing page. So at least you kind of be aware where it's coming through. In a similar way where you go into mobile preview and desktop preview, so it's all the same. Save, just showing you a couple of options to save and exit. The link to the page is immediately provided to you right here, so you can click on that page, and if I do that now, it will give me that same error 404 because it's not found. What is important to know is, unless I click schedule and publish, the page is not going live. At this point in time, there's absolutely nothing good that's going to happen with that. Two options, immediately and publish for later. Usually publish for later is if you're done, if you test it, it looks good and you're happy with it and you want to kind of just deploy it maybe next Monday, start at 8 AM, you can schedule it for publishing. But if you want to just publish it immediately, you just go with that, like me. System will do the save again for you and effectively make it available through that URL. So once the publishing is done, even though it says it might take up to 5 minutes before the changes are visible online, usually I find them pretty quick, but again, it might be because I'm on a different domain. And there we go. As you see, it's not necessarily immediately functional for me. So we'll leave it at that. So that's our first page, and what we're going to do next is we're actually going to create the second one. That's going to be our experience, and with the second one, I'm going to show you. So let me do the same landing page. So we're going to call it, I'm just copying that name. We've got preference form using the same notion. So we've got the same elements, and I'm going to go up into the layout. I think we're just going to go with the same blank form. there are a few ways of building forms in Cloud Pages. There is one normal usual HTML that you can go, but there is another one where you can use a smart capture form, which is this. So let me just drag this one in. So you would see there are a few options here which are fantastic because I can choose where do I want to store that information, what attributes do I need to pass, and so forth. So if I looked into, remember I said the first time when it was loading up, it's building up the standard data extension for us. So what it does, it creates a system data extension that captures a bunch of different elements for us, and it stores in the Cloud Pages data extension. That's a standard one. I can choose to go and say, no, I actually want to choose a different data extension for it, and go into maybe my, I just put it into, you can see that it actually picks up all data extensions now, because that's where I can potentially store information. It doesn't have to be only sendable, and what it brings me all the attributes from that data extensions. If I want to use, I need the email address, I need the first name, I need the last name, I maybe do the one of these items. That's great, and you can call form name if you want to use that as a source for the journey builder. We're not going to touch that right now. What happens on the submit? So what information you want to show, the redirect URLs if you need to go and take them somewhere else, and then styling of the form. So you can go up and choose what sort of the sizes of the font fields, how they should be aligned, the width of this text, and so forth. So it's plenty of these options. But in addition to that, you can always come and customize. So maybe you want to add a bootstrap library here, do a bit of a styling, and so forth. The system kind of takes care of processing. So if I kind of choose this way, I don't actually have to have that processing page. It kind of submits it straight away for me. So therefore, I can go and say, well, that's effectively my job is done here. I need a bit of customization in this case, and I can go and choose my standard HTML block here. Again, going back to the point of, do I want or do I not want that to be maintainable? Because for us, if we provide the smart capture page, you've seen it, it's pretty easy to add stuff and update it and so forth. So we want to keep it the same way for customers or users who are not necessarily technically savvy. This one is a bit more customizable, I guess, to a degree. You can choose different options for different types of things, but ultimately the point being is we just have a bit more control when we're doing that, but it's custom, right? So you code it, you paste it into here, and off you go. So a few things to keep in mind here. Number one is style sheet is one story, but what is important is for the form element itself. So I've got no action at this point in time, which is intentional. So if I click update preferences, it will stay on the same page. We still have to figure out what do we do with this first name bit, because we want to ensure that we sort of grade people when they come in. The point for us is, you can see we've got few fields here, and what we're choosing is we selecting the outdoor preference. So one of the emails, if you go back into the design, was when a person signs up for a program maybe, or just register for the newsletter, we send them an email and ask them, hey, that's great, if you sign up, would you mind telling us what are your outdoor activity preferences are, because we want to potentially personalize some of the details for you, maybe generate some promotion and discounts. So that's the behavior we're trying to drive. And upon submission of that form, what we want to do is we want to trigger an email that we're going to go up and build up now as well. That would be our triggered send, because we want to do it in real time, and we will utilize a triggered send functionality for that. The reason I'm doing that is I want to tie it up with a bit of extra code, so that's why we've got this processing page. So when you click update preference here, it will go to the page we created previously. It will pass some information that we see on the form. We might add some other additional information here. And then on the processing page, we'll use mscript to kind of do the magic with extracting the data, putting it into the context, saving it, triggering the email, using some API routes and whatnot. But ultimately, practically going back to what are we doing here is, you can see that building up the landing pages is not very much different from the building up the emails. You can be as flexible as you choose to. You can be as restrictive and prescriptive. If you've got the users who just need to work with the content blocks, you can certainly support that and let them kind of use that visual editing capabilities of the tool. So again, we click on the done editing for now. I just want to click on schedule and publish. Normally when I click schedule and publish, if you see the preview, that's one of the things to say when we start doing the coding. I'll show you when it doesn't work. But when you see the result rendered here in the dialog, it means the page itself is ready to go, because unfortunately, when it comes down to code processing, one downside of these landing pages is you don't get sort of like a log environment. You don't have a bit of a sandbox to play with. It's literally you code it and it's in a live environment. You don't see if there are any errors. You don't get to know much if you've done the wrong coding. So that's where a bit of a responsibility comes to developers to understand what are you doing and how to test out all of these components and work with it. When we get to the M script, I'll share a couple of practical pieces with you in terms of how to test out a few things and isolate your problems, but practically we should be good to go today. Just to double check and see. Yeah, there we go. So the form runs, and if I click on any of these options, it should go back to the same page. There we go. So that one is functional. So we've done two landing pages. Simple. We don't want to be super complicated here. The point being is just kind of show you how to work with the editor, how to build this out, what are these different options that you've got, and to the extent I pasted it all out, I can add things like button down the page here potentially, and kind of build it out, right, and style it and tell it what needs to be done and so forth. So again, work with it the way you choose is appropriate for you, whether it's visually or not, whether it's code, but always keep in mind who are you building that for and who's going to be using that. All right, so back to our page. So remember, we started with landing pages. We created the collection, so that was the preferences update collection. You would see that we now have one collection, 2 published pages, and it has a bit of activity in terms of what was happening here. So that stays here. It's convenient to see what was happening. You can look at the collection once again. You've got these 2 different pages. It might not be easy sometimes to understand, like if you're using particular naming convention to see the names. So that's one thing to keep in mind on how do you name that and how do you group these assets together, because you don't want to call them like page 1, 2, 3, and 4, but at the same time, if you give it too long of a name, it's a bit difficult to read. So just be mindful of that, and that's why you want to use collections, so you essentially kind of seeing them up. Now let me get back into the email studio for a minute. Any questions here, Shabu?
Yeah, just one on the center profile delivery one. So Luis wanted to ask, is there any best practice about like how to use center profile, delivery profile if you have multiple brand names for different products and services?
Good question. I mean, if you do have multiple brand names, if you've got these, all sitting within the exact same account, it is important that you have a sender profile for each of the brands. Delivery profile could be the same. A lot will come down to authentication of the account and whether or not the IP domain combination should and can be reused between 2 brands. So that's purely like, it's a lot of that is a marketing decision. It's not necessarily what you need to make a decision on, because in this case you kind of need to be almost explicitly told this is how we're going to use that. So I wouldn't expect you to make a decision to say, well, I should be doing this and that. Practically, for each brand, you have from name and address, which is a sender profile. If there's only delivery profile, if there's only one IP on the account, you create one common delivery profile, which is going to be across all of them. Assuming that you're going to have different templates for each of the brands, headers and footers, you switch them off, and then send classification is just going to be a combination of that single kind of common delivery profile and whatever is the relevant sender profile that you want to use.
Great. Thanks, Vlad. There was one question which I answered, but just wanted to get your thoughts on, like, the question between interactive email versus the one that we just did right now,
Yep.
like having the cloud page. So do we have to like have a fallback, if it doesn't work in the email clients, and still send them to the landing page?
Yes, we do have the options, and it is configurable in the interactive email itself. You do have an option to nominate what could be the fallback criteria. So the way the behavior and the functionality is sort of wrapped up is when you're creating these content elements, and when you're defining that form and where it needs to go, you'll need to ensure that you're providing these what happens if it's not going to render. Reality is that we are limited, as I said, by the email clients at the end. So consideration of when to choose which version to go is usually based on looking into your audience. There is a report in Marketing Cloud that tells you the devices that we sort of targeting. So at least the definition between desktop and mobile, as well as different clients. And then you look into domains. So if you've got like the magnitude of Gmails, Hotmails, and anything else. From that sort of analysis, you'll have to kind of think through what is the best and right experience. Because interactive email is a fantastic feature, but if your audience is spread across domains and clients that potentially not going to be able to render, then it's not going to be much of a difference if you build up a static sort of email and which takes customers to the landing page.
Got it. Thanks, Vlad. That's all we have.
Yeah, sure. That's good. Okay, so going back into the email studio, and I'll do it in the email studio. You can do it in the contact builder as well. Basically, we want to create the data extension for the triggered send. So one of the reasons why we need that is in the send, when we sending the message, and we'll take it into that welcome program. So when someone sort of fills out the form, the data points could be different from anything else. And we want to have a placeholder to A, capture that information, and B, be able to use that information for personalization purposes. So that's why we're potentially coming here, creating the data extension that sort of supports us. So let me just create a new folder here, and I'll go into that. These. And we will create a new data extension in this case. So it's still a standard. We're still working with the standard data extension. What we're doing is we're choosing the template in this case. And ignore the fact that I've got so many of them because I was kind of tinkering with a few options way early on. Normally the triggered send data extension and the couple of send logs. So you might have an SMS send log, subscription log, and send log itself available in the accounts. So you've got triggered send data extension is the one that we want to use. It's all in one word. You can see that the system populates the name for me. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to use a prescriptive name for that. Personally, I do find that triggered send DE or TSDE as abbreviation. I tend to stick it all over the place when I've got triggered send DEs. At least it gives me straight away distinctive understanding this is a triggered send message data extension. So it is sendable. As I said, it is selected for me. I want it to be sendable. I don't want a data retention in my case, but it could be something to consider. One of the things with triggered send data extensions, if you have an experience where there could be a huge volume of these sends, it could actually be a good idea to create like an archive version of that DE with a similar structure, and then have a nightly operation that sort of pulls the data from that DE and pushes it into archive. And then you click on the retention setting and say, we'll keep the records for, I don't know, maybe like 5 days, 2 days, 2 weeks, whatever is relevant in your case. Triggered send data extension is one of those data extensions where retention policy is a good consideration to have. And even if you were not necessarily told when you need to configure it, it's a good point to ask, someone who's sort of, your architect or a lead to say, should we consider a data retention policy for that field? You can see that 2 fields are populated. This is right back to the templates that I started the day with. They are created for me and I cannot remove them. These are pretty much mandated by the functionality of the send itself. So all I need to do is remember we used first name. That's going to be a text. We want to keep your interest. We'll keep it as a text as well. And then a couple of fields I usually include. So there's one, local send time. And then date headed. So both are dates and times, or dates in this view, right? They both are actually, this one is not nullable because I want that to be included. This one is nullable because I want to be a system date. So the difference between these two is this is going to be populated for me when the entry is added to the data extension. With the local send time, I actually want to provide specific value. The reason for that is the system date time is always going to be in the central standard time. So I keep that more like a auditing, because I can relate the date and timestamps to quite a few other event date and timestamps that are normally saved in the system time zone. But in some cases, I do want to look up for a local time, and it's convenient for me if I want to look into when it actually happened, morning, afternoon, and so forth. So it could be different analysis reasons. And we will see in the M script, one of the features that we will use, we actually create a timestamp value using the current date and time and save it in this field. So we're going to maintain that subscriber key relationship in the same way because the system populated it for us. So we'll refer to that. And notice that I'm not creating primary key. Remember, because this is treated as always add records. If you're going to have a lot of concurrent processes trying to do the send and add records, it's always populated one at a time, or most of the time it's one at a time, and we don't want to create any contingency on insert, so therefore we're just leaving no keys. We're not expecting to go back into the data extension often for lookups and logic and queries. That's the reason if you kind of need to go, you might need to create the copy D as well. So anyhow, we've got this populated, it's done, it's set up, we can click create. And the next step for us when we're configuring the triggered send itself, you'll have to go into this interactions menu in the email studio, and you go into the triggered emails option. So in this case, I'm gonna, let's put it, cheat a bit because I haven't created the email, but I know that we're sort of on the close proximity with the time. So what I want to do is I just want to configure and show you the steps to configure that triggered send, so you know that, and then you can use instructions to configure if you need to, or if you feel like testing it out. What we're going to do is we're going to configure the triggered send definition, so we'll call it outdoor rest date triggered send. And let me just define the description here. So what we're doing is we're sending an email when someone is updating their profile. Now, remember that send classification we configured? Amazing. It's already here. It's already selected. It's fantastic because I don't have to go up and define anything here. Once again, type it, mistype it. It's all done. So that's already a benefit of reusing what we've done before. If I do feel like I need to overwrite again, maybe brand question, maybe something else, I can come up and choose another sender profile. You can see that I'm limiting options here. I don't have the customization here. I'm forcing that to be configured, and that's why we've done that. In terms of content, I'm gonna just use the email that we created before. Remember the feedback survey. After the session, I'll configure the actual proper email, and I'll show you what it needs to be done. But for simplicity, for now, we just choose that email. It populates the subject line and the pre-header, so it's kind of done. And what is important for us is, as I said, we want to include that data extension as our triggered send data extension. You can see that it only allows us to choose data extension that have been created from the template. If you don't create it from the template, you won't be able to find and choose that. So it's another almost like validation. Did you create the right way besides the field? From the list perspective, you normally choose all subscriber list. If you need to make any modifications at the same time, like you might need to. For now, I'm not going to deep dive into these details. We'll skip it, and we don't use any suppressions, we don't use any exclusions, we don't use CC or BCC. This is going to be very simple click. Anything else, I'm keeping it default here at that point in time. I'm clicking save. One of the interesting things with the triggered send, think of that it's almost like an API endpoint. So the way the triggered send works is it's not the email that I click send button and it executes the send. It's literally an inbound API call. In order for me to make it available, I'll have to choose it and click start. And once the system does the publishing, you will get the successfully started, which is great. It generates that external key. That's my reference in API. One of the things that I should have done is potentially choose the specific nick that I can refer to, but I don't mind. Numeric value is fine for me. I can still refer to that uniquely, and the system will ensure that it is uniquely valid. You can see description, you can see when it was deleted and so forth. The key point for us is running. And once we start triggering the actual messages, you will see that something gets in the queue and then ticks into completed, which means the send was processed and executed. At any point in time, if there is something sitting in the queue, maybe I'll pause it, I can have a look and view it, and I can publish, pause all of these items if I need to make any changes. So this is currently functional, and it's pretty much ready for me to go up and start triggering API calls for it. So at that point in time, I'll do another quick pause and ask if there are any questions.
Not at the moment, Vlad. I think we're good for now. Yeah.
Cool.
All the answered most of the ones. So.
Fantastic. You're doing an amazing job, Shiva, making it too easy for me. No, that's kind of like it. So from the only thing that is sort of left out for me is really build up the content for that message. So I'll need to look into building up some of the elements for the content and effectively build out the message for that profile. So for the next time, let me just jump back into that one of these things, just reiterate what are we effectively putting together. So now put it into perspective. So today we've done a template, right? That's really a core foundation for all of these different emails that we're going to be sending. And as you can see, we've got that welcome email for people who go through the welcome journey, and we will have the feedback survey journey, which is going to be a different experience that has invite and feedback request and so forth. We've got a couple of web pages in this design. I've only demonstrated to you one. So we've created form processing page. We've created that profile update form. We haven't plugged it. We haven't really, established the plumbing code that connects them together. We just created placeholders like the front end, because focus for today was more getting the content right. So we've defined at least one email, and we actually looked into that feedback request email form first. And then when we looked into that, we said, okay, so this is how you construct the email using the template. This is how you might save the blocks. This is how you preview the email. So you use the data extension with some details to populate and see, what the end email result would look like. These are the common steps that you're going to execute and do when it comes down to creating pages, creating emails. Templates, blocks, varieties of them. It's something to explore. There's plenty of things to kind of think through. Always keep in mind usability of that and maintainability, as I refer to. Will the end user be able to manage it after you? And in some cases, like with our forms, we may not necessarily want them to be going up and tinkering with them. Potentially asking someone who's a bit more technical capable to do the updates rather than trying to go and hack it out. So these are sort of few options that we went through. We've configured that triggered send just now. That's triggered send definition, right? So what we want that to do is send that profile update confirmation email when we need to. And one of the things that normally in this sort of communication, I've got this recommendation model, something that will include predictive recommendations for the customer. The other emails that we have on the right hand side, part of that feedback form, I'll actually look into, maybe we'll configure these, instead of using the feedback form, we'll actually do the interactive email for the feedback as an option next time when we start sort of enabling the journeys and kind of configuring these elements, because we're going to have a bit of a space and time to do it. So I'll probably keep some elements through the web pages, and then other elements we'll just do through the different sort of way of achieving that. Guide wise, you've got details in this guide for data points at this stage. I haven't configured full automation steps for you. Again, take it with, you've seen what needs to be done. If you haven't watched the recording, practically you can make it as complex as you need to. But we went through configuring the data extension, running up through the import activity, setting it up. So that was more around that session 1. Today we've done these email and web channel configurations. Next story for us is going to be that building out the journeys. What do you need to do? There's one extra thing that we'll have to touch on, is configuring additional data relationships that we will use within the journey. So I'll walk you through that, and then effectively how to orchestrate that execution altogether of the journeys. The session 4 will take us into that, a bit of an SQL play, a bit of an API. We'll look into these, plumbing up these landing pages and doing some extra cool stuff, and then we'll get down to the actual Marketing Cloud Connect and some of the use cases with Marketing Cloud Connect. That's kind of it from me for today. Any other sort of last minute questions, thoughts, feedback?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, I just got a question from Calvin. The triggered send versus the Journey Builder API event. The triggered send caters more for a one time of email. Is that correct?
Correct. And it is more of a bit of a legacy, I guess, experience where you can have SOAP and REST API to trigger that. Today, and we'll talk about that next time in the journeys, there is a transactional email send that you can look into. This is a slightly different analogy to the sort of triggered send itself as a definition. But I choose this one because we kind of like have some of the functions that are embedded into mscript that it's a bit easier for me to trigger through the mscript. That's why I went down the route of the triggered send. These days you can look into using transactional set and or directly triggering the journey API itself. That's accurate as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vlad. Vlad, one last thing on the guide, the data management link. Right now, it's asking for access, so I guess it's not open for public yet.
Yeah. Okay. Let me correct that because yeah, I might have done that unintentionally. So let me fix it up. We'll just make sure that it is in the right mode and allows access for that. So there we go. If you just refresh the page, it should get you, yeah, it's external, so it should be functional now. Thanks for that note. I do apologize. Yeah, sometimes I can forget these options. I'm pretty sure that these are all external, yes.
Okay. Vlad, are we going to be covering tracking in any of our future sessions?
Tracking is in.
Link tracking, and how do you respond or like get a tracking report?
I kind of didn't think through that too much, but maybe that's one of the topics to add. Let me look into that maybe next time when we start going into the journey. One part of the configuration I can actually add to say how do we look at the links and what is the content of the HTML and so forth. So link tracking, at least to cover from what do you configure when it makes sense and what is the impact and where do you see the result. Cool. These are all good questions. Well, if anything else, more than welcome to ask. But if not, I can see there's been plenty of questions. You've done a great job, Shibu. Thank you for looking after the questions queue.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope it was very useful for all the audience, and definitely like we're recording it, so I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot more people watching it. So.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much.
A lot of awesome content. Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you spending time with us. And yeah, as Shibu said, hopefully it is practical and useful for you. And if there are any other thoughts, I do like, as I said, that question about tracking. I'll see if we can embed that into the next talk track, at least to kind of give you an idea. How do we embed it into the content, and then how do we track that in and see it in the report? So, all right. With that, thanks a lot, and have a great day and weekend ahead of you. Take care.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you all. Bye.